Hello, I'm Hannah Freed. I'm the CEO of All Voting is Local, and I'm joined by Jennifer Morell. We are members of the National Task Force on Election Crises, and we're here to talk about vote by mail.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. So we're going to start with a general question about voting by mail, which is how long has mail voting been around and why would someone want to use it?
Very nice question. Vote by mail has been around for the better part of 2 centuries, since the Civil War. And people want to vote by mail 2 reasons. I think one, people just like choices. People like to have options. That is part of human nature. I would say it's part of the American spirit, but also because vote by mail is practical. If you are a person who works a couple of jobs and it is hard for you to get to the polls between, let's say, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. or the hours that the polls are open in your town, if you're a person who needs to travel, if you are a person who is sick or has a disability and you can't get to the polling place, vote by mail is the way that you can make your voice heard. And without it, millions, literally tens of millions of Americans would not be able to cast their ballot. 47 million people voted by mail in 2024 of all kinds: Democrats, Republicans, independents, young people, older folks, folks from high income households, folks from lower income households, students, everybody.
Hannah, you said you used the word voting by mail. Sometimes we hear people say absentee voting, all mail voting. Is there a difference? Are they the same thing? Why do we have different terms for this process?
I might come back to that American spirit again. We have different terms because we have different states. We have different legislatures. We have different leaders. State law got written in different kinds of ways, but it all comes down to a similar process, which is that you receive a ballot in the mail, you vote it from the comfort of your home, and you return it by mail. Some people will return their vote by mail ballot at a drop box, which is a secure location that's run by a local election official. But that ballot is coming to you by U.S. Postal Service. Some states do have different rules about how they run vote by mail or absentee voting. Some states actually require you to be absent, which is where the absentee comes in. You're not there that day in your town, so you're going to say, "Hey, I'm going to get that ballot in the mail." Some states allow everybody to vote by mail, and you have to request the ballot to have it delivered to you. Some states, like Oregon or Washington State, almost everybody votes by mail. And I believe, Jennifer, you'll check me if I'm wrong, but I believe in both states, officials in the state mail every person a vote by mail ballot. Is that right?
That's correct. Great.
Walk us through the basic lifestyle of a mail ballot. What happens from the time a voter requests one to when it gets counted?
That's a great question. And as you mentioned, there are slight variations of this depending on the state and the jurisdiction you're in. But in every jurisdiction, the very first step is those ballots are received by the local election office. That means they're retrieved from the post office or retrieved from ballot drop boxes. And the important point about this step is that some sort of chain of custody is established once those ballots enter into the election office. Next, ballots go through something we call sorting. Now, depending on whether the local election office uses technology to do that, so in large election offices, those ballots might be ran through equipment that can, again, verify the piece count and sometimes capture information like the unique the unique barcode that's on there, the voter ID code. Sometimes it will capture images of the signature. But even if it's done manually, there's some sort of sorting process just to verify that all the ballots that have been returned, all those envelopes that have been returned, are for that election that's being held, that they are mail pieces that are meant to be opened. The third step is validation. In some states, this is a signature review where we're making sure that the person who was issued the ballot is the same person that returned it. In other states, there may be other types of information that need to be on that return envelope that are part of that validation process. That could be including a driver's license number, social security number, date of birth, or an address. After those envelopes have been reviewed, they've been validated, they've been accepted, Those that have been accepted will move on to what we call opening and extraction. I should note those that have not been accepted also get moved to a different processing area where in states that allow voters to cure whatever created the issue that the ballot was rejected for, those will be held until that can be resolved. But those that are moving on to opening and extraction, again, every single stage in this process, there's some type of ballot accounting, a log or chain of custody log that'll be established. And this step does exactly what it sounds like. The envelope is opened, the ballot is removed, and we election workers will make that ballot ready to be scanned. Now, there's an interim step in here. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but sometimes when one of those ballots is removed, it might be damaged, could have been accidentally cut. In some states, there's a requirement that ballots with identifying marks be remedied. And the way that we do that is through something called ballot duplication or ballot replication, where that damaged ballot will be marked in exactly the same way as the voter marked it, but on a ballot that can be scanned and interpreted by the voting system. So next we move to scanning. All of those ballots that have been removed from those envelopes. Teams of election workers will again do some sort of piece count to ensure everything is there, nothing's been lost, nothing's been added. They're going to verify that. There's often some other paperwork that has to be completed, and those ballots are sent through the voting equipment so that each and every one can be read and interpreted, and the voter markings attributed to the correct candidate. There might be, in many places, especially if those ballots are hand marked, a need to do something called adjudication, where maybe the mark wasn't quite clear. Maybe a voter put an X through the oval instead of filling in the oval, or filled it in part way. And so teams of humans will review that, and in accordance with that state's laws, make a determination as to whether or not that oval can be counted as a vote for that candidate.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the safeguards that go into voting by mail, specifically about how elections officials ensure that the process is proceeding how it's supposed to, and that every voter is able to cast a ballot that's going to count?
Sure. So I mentioned the word chain of custody. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot. I think it's often misunderstood, but it's a critical part of the integrity of voting by mail. And that means from the time those ballots are retrieved all the way through the process, we want to ensure that we know who had possession of them and when. And if ballots are moved for some reason, they're moved to a different processing area. Maybe there's an exception. There's a ballot that needs to have a secondary review. Anytime that happens, we want some sort of documentation as to who took possession of that. So chain of custody becomes a really important part of that, the safety and protection of those mail ballots. The other part is the validation piece. I think there's this misunderstanding about how we determine whether or not a ballot that was returned to an election office is a legitimate ballot. And there are a number of things in place. First, anytime a mail ballot is issued, there's a unique identifier that goes on each and every one of those envelopes. And so the only way that ballot will be accepted when it very first comes back to the office is that unique identifier tied to that voter has to match up. And if it doesn't, that ballot's going to be set aside for further research. Second is the requirements in each state for validation. As I mentioned, whether that's a voter signing it and dating it, signing it and putting some additional personally identifiable information that the local election office can use to validate that, in fact, it was the voter who was issued that ballot was the same person who returned it. The other element, I guess, in security is in most offices, the common practice is everything is done in bipartisan teams. So when we're extracting ballots, when we're reviewing ballots to validate them, when we're scanning ballots, when we're transporting them from drop boxes, that's always going to be done in at least teams of two, and in many places, bipartisan teams of two.
Thank you. I will say I don't get to talk to an expert such as Jennifer, every single day. So this is pretty fun for me. What I'm hearing you describe are a lot of protections. And I think that right now we're in a moment where we're hearing a lot of disinformation about voting in this way, despite its popularity, right? Despite the fact that 47 million people chose to vote by mail. So we know Americans love voting in this way. People should feel that there are a lot of protections in place to ensure that the system is one that is operating the way that it's supposed to and that is protecting your vote and the votes of your neighbors.
Yes. And the thing that we all need to remember and remind ourselves is that voting, the administration of elections, and the voting process is never done by a single individual. It's done by, in some places, armies of volunteer poll workers, election judges, other workers that have been brought in, put under oath, background checks often administered, but all working together to make this happen. It's not done in isolation. And so in some ways, that's like the biggest security we have, is that when this process is happening, there are lots of people around to look and observe and ensure that it's being done in compliance with state and local policies and laws. Some voters might worry about their ballot being lost in the mail or arriving late, especially given all of the conversation we've seen recently about changes to mail ballot voting laws and to changes at the post office. So how can voters ensure their ballots make it to their election office in time to be
Yeah,
counted?
great question. I'm going to answer this in two ways. Number one is to vote early. If you want to vote by mail, request your ballot early as soon as ballots are available, which starts to be about 40 days or so, 45 days, I think, right, Jennifer, before the election. You can request your ballot then and it will get mailed to you and then return it right away. I know I also am a person. I also am a person with a busy life, but it is worth it to get your ballot back early so that there's absolutely no question and nothing then for you to worry about. And the second thing is that elections officials have anticipated that you might worry. And so I think now most, if not all states, have a system for voters to track the status of their ballot. Has it been sent out? If you've returned it, has it been received? And there's a way for you to do that either on your local election official's website or on your Secretary of State website. And so if you have questions about that, go to the Secretary of State. That's a great starting place. And you can follow some prompts to get to exactly the place where you can check and see, where is my ballot? There is a Supreme Court case, United States Supreme Court case pending right now called Watson, which is about the deadline by which people can return their ballots. And I believe it is 14 states plus the District of Columbia that have that grace period. And we don't know yet how the United States Supreme Court is going to decide. I do think it really emphasizes the point that the best thing that voters can do is request and return their vote by mail ballots early. If that's the method of voting that you want for yourself, get your ballot in. Let me ask you, Jennifer, one more question if I can, which is talk to us about overseas voters. We know that there are deployed members of our military. We know that there are members of our military stationed overseas. Sometimes they are bringing with them their families or dependents. How does the process differ for those voters? What are the processes that are in place to make sure that their ballots arrive on time and get counted?
Well, the exciting thing is that those processes have gotten so much better since I was an overseas dependent of a military member. Just like the rest of our absentee or mail ballot voters, they will all be mailed a ballot, but to ensure that they receive it, in many places they also can be issued an electronic ballot so that they have a way to get that quickly. In most states, I should say, they're required to return the physical ballot that they received or to print that electronic ballot, complete it, and return it through the mail. There are some states that will allow those overseas and military members to return it through a secure online portal. So there are, again, varies by state, but there are some different options to make sure they get that ballot in time and they can return that ballot in time. I will also say there are great both federal and state programs. and nonprofit groups working to ensure that military members and their families are as informed as they can be about those dates and deadlines, informed about those options, and sometimes even in a state that requires it to be delivered in through the mail both ways, making sure they understand where they can access things like diplomatic pouches or other services to help return that mail ballot. So, Hannah, for voters who have heard conflicting information about mail-in voting, what are some reliable sources that they can turn to for accurate information about the laws and policies in their state?
Terrific question. The number one authority source of information I'm going to direct somebody to is their state or local election official. That's your Secretary of State. If you live in a city or a county, you can go to your local board of elections, see what's up. They are a great resource about everything that you need to know, soup to nuts, about every method of voting, by the way, not just voting by mail, but also about vote by mail. The other one I'm going to send you to just for general information about voting, you want to find out a little bit more, is the Nonpartisan Election Protection website and hotline. That's 866 Our Vote. The website is the same, easy to find in multiple languages, terrific resource about the process and experience of voting for voters anywhere in the country.
I love that Hannah reminded voters that they need to return their ballot early. I would also remind people to take your time and make sure that you've completed that affidavit and completed that envelope securely, that you've followed all of the instructions. I promise election offices aren't trying to make things complicated. They're simply trying to do what the laws in their state requires. And it's so heartbreaking for them when they get a ballot returned and returned on time, but someone's forgot to sign it or some other human mistake. So I just encourage people to really be thoughtful and make sure so that their ballot can be counted. They return it on time. They follow all the steps. They make sure that they've gone through all of the directions before returning it. As part of that validation process, whether they're looking at a signature, whether they're comparing other sorts of information, there are times when it doesn't match what is on the voter record, what's on file. And so in most jurisdictions, there's a multi-tiered process, meaning if the first reviewer finds that it doesn't match or it's incorrect, they'll often send it for a second and sometimes even a third review. At that point, though, if it's clear that that envelope cannot be accepted, it's rejected temporarily. A notice is sent to the voter in many states, allowing them to come in and cure or correct whatever it is that's wrong. Often they have to provide a photocopy of their ID, sometimes appear in person. So there are safeguards in place when doing that cure process. It's not until the election is officially canvassed before any ballots that have not been cured or those reasons for rejection haven't been resolved are officially rejected.
People should just know hope is not lost. It's
Yes.
actually a good reminder too to why we encourage people to check the status of their ballot, because if there's a problem, you're going to see that indicated when you check. I think
Yes.
gives you you'll get information about how you can make sure your ballot is going to count, and seeing it through is really important. We know that elections can be close. We know that every vote matters, and that's a way for you to be sure that your voice is getting registered in that way.